Animal rescue is an honorable job. Saving people's beloved pets in desperate situations. Rescuing wildlife when it gets in a bind. It's a job I think we can all respect. But what happens when it's the animal that puts you in a situation where there's no rescue? Today, we have 5 allegedly true scary stories featuring elusive monsters, the next level of sleep paralysis, and an animal rescue that turned into a life-or-death encounter with a nightmare creature. Enjoy. If you have a story of your own, be sure to share it with us at darkstories.org or darknessprevails.org/submit. Now, let's begin. The Thing of Snake Lick from Nomad 64. My name is Tate. I'm 19 and I'm from a small town in Kentucky. I was with my friend when this happened, and we were going to his house so he could grab some clothes to stay the night. He had gone through a rough breakup recently and didn't want to take the normal way because he didn't want to pass by his ex's house, so we decided to take a back road called Snake Lick. Keep in mind it was around 2 or 3 in the morning at the time, and these roads are extremely curvy, so you have to drive really slow or else you'll wreck. We had just gotten off the highway, Highway 27, and turned onto Snake Lick. The moment we made it onto the road, we had passed a dead tree. That was when my friend and I heard something hit the roof of our truck. "Did you hear that?" my friend asked me. "Yeah," I said. "What do you think it was?" He shrugged, and then we rolled up our windows. Not long after, we began to hear scratching and pounding coming from where the thing had landed on the roof. I was freaking out, so I slammed on the gas. So I was going 50 to 60 in no time, despite how curvy the road was. But this thing just stayed up there, scratching and pounding on the metal of the roof. This continued until we took a curve wrong, causing the truck to slide out. Luckily, I didn't hit anything, and neither me nor my friend were harmed. But the noises had stopped. When we got to my friend's house, we quickly checked out the roof. There we found claw marks and a small handprint. A handprint too small to be either of ours, though it was kind of human in shape. It didn't take us long to look into Snake Lick. Apparently, several people have had weird encounters with strange entities in that neck of the woods. This also reminded me of an old story I'd heard. You see, out by Snake Lick, there's an old brick building built in the side of a hill, and people claim that there were babies buried in those walls. To this day, I have no idea if it was some weird animal, a ghost of a child, or something entirely different, but I know it was real. I'll never forget that irritating, terrifying, metallic clawing sound coming right from above me. All I do know is that whatever the thing was, it was mad, and it was ready to take the roof off to get to us. If you find yourself driving on Snake Lick, be careful. The Rescue from Kim B. I live in the rural end of a village in England. I've always thought I was very lucky with my line of work and where I lived. I was employed by an animal rescue charity. This tended to be wildlife call-outs more than domestic, but I was pretty handy at getting a cat out of a tree. Back in 1995, there was a particular night while on call that I'll never forget. It started out as any normal night. I had just decided to watch a movie when I received my first call of the evening around 9 p.m. The caller advised that some livestock on his farm had been found dead in unknown circumstances. I informed him that he would need to call the police or RSPCA as we didn't deal with dead animals, and I politely ended the call. A bit of time had passed after that when the phone rang again. It was the same guy. though this time they sounded slightly different. He spoke in almost a whisper, like he was trying to filter his voice. The person got upset that no one would help them, begging for me to come out to help him because a wild creature was hunting on their farm. I told him I would see what I can do. Then I took down the address. When I checked it, it was only 30 minutes from my house. So I called my colleague Joe, who lives closer to the village and worked the same shift as me for about 5 years. We talked about the call and decided that we should go and see what we can do to help. After all, the past few nights had been pretty quiet. Soon enough, I pulled up to the address. I knew that Joe wouldn't be far behind me. I could see the farmhouse to my right and the top of a barn behind it. There was also a glow from the back from what I assumed to be the lights in the yard. I had a quick look around from the drive, but couldn't see anyone. After about 20 minutes, Joe finally arrived. As he got out of his car, he told me that the place gave him a really creepy feeling. I recall Joe saying, "This is a farm, right? Then why is it so quiet?" I told him to get a grip, but a second later I realized he had a point. I was beginning to feel uneasy. We were making our way up to the front of the house when something made us both stop in our tracks. There was movement in the bushes a good couple of feet away to the left of us. Suddenly, there was a mighty growl. It was so deep it hit me in the bottom of my stomach, making all my senses go crazy. It was truly a fight or flight moment. I turned my head round to Joe, and I whispered to him, "What the hell was that?" Joe was about to answer when we heard whatever it was in the bushes moving again. Something big, something dark, ran out, heading away from us down a small path that appeared to lead round to the back of the house. I did not get a good look at this thing, but I knew it was something that I'd never seen before. We stood there for a few minutes gathering ourselves. We looked at each other, and without a word, decided that we should continue up to the house and go knock on their door. After all, we were still professionals. But feeling a bit shaken up, we approached the porch steadily, then knocked on the door. I remember Joe kept his back to me, constantly checking the bushes and path to our left. After a few minutes, there was no response, but we could hear that the TV was still on somewhere inside. I knocked again, louder this time, and we waited. But there was no answer. While we just stood there and waited, I thought about what we were going to do when Joe spoke up. It made me jump a mile high. He suggested we should go and try to find the back door. I was surprised, as Joe could be a bit of a wimp at times. We looked around from where we stood and saw the only path which led round to the back was the same way that the dark creature had taken. I decided that we weren't going down there, so I desperately looked for another way. I found a gate which led to the yard. We hopped over because it was chained shut. We stayed close to the house and looked into the windows to see if we could find anyone. Again, there was nobody. But I could see a glow of light coming from what I thought to be the kitchen. By this point, something deep down inside of me was screaming for me to turn around, get back in the car, and drive away. I ignored this feeling and carried on, looking around the property. I'll never forget how silent that place was. It was really getting to me. As we made our way around, we reached the yard, and I pointed out to Joe that the back door was open. I remember thinking that this whole situation was so wrong, and we are not the people who should be here. We made our way over to the back door anyway. I had a sudden, overwhelming feeling that we shouldn't be outside right now, and that we were being watched. I know we shouldn't have, but we entered the house, calling out to anyone that was there, hoping that someone would respond. I took a quick scan around the kitchen and noticed that the phone had been pulled off the wall. It was lying on the floor with one of our info cards beside it. On the back, I noticed my number had been handwritten. While we were stood in the house staring at this, I still had the feeling we were being watched from somewhere outside, so I quickly shut the back door behind us. The second the door was closed, there was a deep, low growl that came from the other side. But this time, it was ever so different. I'll never forget the sound of it. Whatever it was trying to say something. It sounded like broken speech. After a few terrifying minutes, the sound came again. I stood there, utterly petrified. Something then began to scratch at the door, sniffing at it too. I turned to Joe, who had turned pale with fear, gesturing to him to keep quiet. Eventually, the sounds from the door stopped, and I heard it outside moving away. That creature. We stood there like statues for a few minutes, till we felt it was safe to move or make any sort of sound. I thought I should have a look around the house, so I slowly walked through the kitchen into a hallway and saw the glow of the TV coming from a room to the right. I called out again, but this time softer, still terrified and intimidated by that experience at the door. I needed to know if someone was in here, but I was not getting any answer. I walked to the room with the TV in it and looked around. There was no one to be found. I found the remote on the arm of a chair and muted the TV. I didn't want to turn it off for some reason. To this day, I still don't know why. I made my way back and noticed a window at the end of the hall left the kitchen doorway. There was something moving just outside of it. The window overlooked the yard of the farm and the adjoining barns. It was lit up by the yard lights, which seemed to be attached to the house from the shadows that were being cast. I looked over to check on Joe, who was still in the kitchen. He hadn't moved at all, but he did look at me, fear in his eyes. I pointed toward the window near me, which later on he told me he couldn't see from where he was. I moved closer to try and get a better understanding of what was going on out there. From the window, I couldn't see any movement from anyone or anything, just farm equipment and random stuff thrown about. But then, something moved. I turned my head quickly, trying to get a glimpse of it. What I saw was a black mass moving along the shadows of the barn opposite the house. It looked to be sniffing around, like it was trying to find something. As everything else around us was entirely silent, it wasn't hard to hear this thing sniffing and growling. It was still difficult to see what it actually was. From that distance, and with this amount of light, it was just a black mass. If anything, it reminded me of a dog. It walked on all fours, but its legs were twisted. It was big and dark. It was blacker than the shadows it was in. Feeling creeped out, I slowly moved away from the window, keeping low in the hopes it couldn't see me, and I headed back into the kitchen to be with Joe. 1 a.m. was approaching. I remember this because I kept looking at the cuckoo clock on the wall. The kitchen was old-fashioned, stained yellow with net curtains in the window above the sink. The walls were covered with dated and stained wallpaper. I kept thinking, this place would be nice if it had a fresh lick of paint. By this point, I was getting very tired and achy from sitting in the same place. Joe and I hadn't said much to each other in the last few hours, in fear of the thing outside hearing us. I looked over and Joe's eyes were shut, so I gave him a slight nudge as I couldn't believe he was falling asleep in a time like this. He sat up straight and looked at me in a panic. I whispered it's okay, telling him that we either need to lock this house down and stay until sunrise, or we need to try to make a break for the car. As it was wintertime, The sun would not be rising until 8 or 9 a.m., and I did not want to stay in this place for another 7 to 8 hours. We sat there in silence for a bit longer, thinking over the options. Then, in the distance, we heard the growling again. It sounded like it was getting closer, though. Keeping low, I made a move for the hallway. I headed to the front door to see if I could open it, but the handle wouldn't budge. I thought it must have been locked. Fed up and just generally pissed off because we were stuck in someone else's house, I have to say that I used to have a very short temper. I stood up straight and walked back into the kitchen. The back door was the kind of stable-style door, with a top half and a lower half. I unlatched the top half and screamed at the top of my lungs, "Would you just saw it off?" I quickly slammed the door shut, Joe looking at me in utter shock. Then, from outside, we heard the growl again. The scratching and sniffing grew louder at the door. My anger had caused us to become in danger again. I shook my head and silently apologized to Joe. We waited for another hour, not moving, until these sounds finally went away. I wanted to get out of this house, out of this situation. I made my way back into the hall to try and look for a key for the front. I was not taking any chances leaving via the back. I searched around the few rooms on the lower ground, all of which needed to be fixed up. I found a key in a dresser drawer in the living room, but it wasn't the one I needed. Feeling truly trapped and getting to the point of giving up, I decided to try the front door again. This time I checked every inch and found it wasn't actually locked. It was latched. Finding this out, I laughed so hard at myself, all while trying to keep quiet. I was making my way back to the kitchen when I saw a silhouette-like figure in the window staring directly at me. I froze in the spot, staring back at whatever it was. I still couldn't get a look at it, as it was so black, and it was really dark outside in the first place. I couldn't see any eyes, but I knew it was looking at me. I could feel it. It was going right through me. I thought this was it. It's now or never. I was close enough to the kitchen that I could see Joe's back. I softly called his name through my teeth. Still locking eyes with this creature, I could feel myself getting more terrified. I called out for Joe again, and he finally came over to the doorway. I whispered in a tone through my teeth for him to get down low and that we were going to make a run for the cars. I remember Joe looking at me and nodding his head. I told him to not look toward the window, which was to his left, and to just head to the door. Joe got down low and headed toward the exit. When he made it to the door, I told him where he could find the latch, to get a hold of it, as we were going to run as fast as we could to the cars. After waiting a few minutes, I turned and shouted, "Now!" He unlatched the door and threw it open. I ran out so fast. I recall turning around just as I left the door and looking at the window. I could tell that the black mass of the creature had gone. We reached the cars, which luckily neither of us had locked. My car was the closest, so I dove into the driver's seat, and Joe jumped in the back. In the corner of my vision, I could see the dark figure moving quickly down the path at the side of the house. It was heading right towards us. This time, I could have sworn I saw it running on 2 legs, not 4, making me even more confused as to what the hell kind of animal it was. Its stride looked awkward and cumbersome. Feeling seriously beyond freaked out, I started the car, and the two of us sped down the lane. I went straight to the police station. I had gone so fast I nearly crashed the car. Even though it was likely the police wouldn't believe us, I just wanted to be somewhere that I could feel a bit more safe. When we made it to the station, Joe and I got out, looking at each other, and laughed with relief. Then I looked at the car, and noticed that there was a massive dent in the shape of a footprint on the bonnet. It almost looked like a dog's paw print, but it was bigger and misshapen. I looked at Joe and just shook my head. It was now nearly 4 a.m., and I'd given my statement to the police. I knew some of the officers quite well. They saw how scared Joe and I were. They assured me they'd go to check out the farm when they were able to the next day. Not feeling in the right mind to be alone, Joe said I could stay at his house, as it was nearer to the village than mine. We made it to Joe's, and we both just sat on the sofa, not really saying much to each other. Joe then realized he had left his car at the farm, so he had a call to make. I must have fallen asleep, as the next thing I knew I was waking up, and it was sunny outside. I called the station to check if they had attended the farm. They advised me that officers had been and found that the front door was shut, and that they were not able to open it. They could hear the TV on inside as well. This made my skin crawl, because I had muted the TV. They advised that the officers had gained entry through an open rear door and found no one inside. They checked over the barn in the yard and didn't see anything unusual. Joe had asked about his car and they agreed to bring it back for him, as he refused to go to the farm to collect it, even during the day. After a few days passed, I received another call from the station. They had continued their search and were informing me that they had found the farmer, who had locked himself in a small storage room in the barn opposite the house. It took them a while to convince him to leave. Once he was out, he just kept rambling about the darkness and how the shadow had killed his animals. I still do not know what was going on at that farm. I have no idea what we encountered, and this is easily my worst experience working in animal rescue. Tim, the Drowned Boy, from ZodiacHunter. We lived in Washington State. I was 7 years old and my sister, Lucy, was 5. Our town was small, so we knew everyone in it. So when my sister suddenly asked to go play with Tim, I had no idea who she was talking about. We didn't know a Tim anywhere around. I asked her if it was one of her friend's parents, but no, she said. He was our age. I asked her what he looked like, and she said he had white skin and even whiter hair. "What kind of white do you mean?" I asked. And the first thing she did was go to grab a gallon of milk. "That's impossible," I said. "No one's skin is that white." She even said that his eyes were gray like the moon. She had to have been making this up, right? I went to my parents and asked if a new family had moved in. When they asked why, I told them about this Tim, explaining his appearance. She covered her mouth and her eyes began to look watery. I was of course confused, but she told me to sit down. I did as she told me. She then began to tell me a story about the Martinez family, who had a son named Tim. In the nearby lake that was down the street on our road, the same one where we went swimming every summer, the Martinez family went swimming as well. They arrived on a day when no one else was around. It was peaceful at least, but a certain warning that they ignored was the fact that there were alligators in the lake. Tim's parents ended up being attacked and killed. As an orphan, Tim bounced between foster parents, and before long, he went missing, only to be found at the same lake, drowned. The police said he had drowned himself. Being only 7 at the time and hearing a story so tragic and horrifying, it's something that stuck with me forever. We live in Texas now, but I still remember that tale. I still remember my sister describing him, and I wonder, did she continue to see him after we left? Rest in peace, Tim. Late night walk in deep Chicago. From Anonymous. I'm a 15-year-old girl living with my mom and little brother. I live in a really sketchy neighborhood in downtown Chicago. One night, I was walking home from a party with my friend Jay. Before I start my story, I'm going to give you a little background. It's a pretty crime-ridden part of our town, and there are pretty weird dudes out there. But this was different. I was walking home when this woman popped up out of nowhere. She looked to be around 70. She was holding this bag that you get from your typical grocery store. She looked to be limping too. I couldn't tell if she was injured or old or both. She came up to us and said that she was a disabled veteran and that she would really appreciate it if anyone, would help her walk home. She said that she lived a block away, and the only reason she wanted us to walk her home was that she had been injured in the war. Well, being the sweet 15-year-old I was, I said we could walk her home. After this incident, Jay and I realized there was something off about this woman. First of all, while we don't believe in stereotypes, this woman was tall. I mean absolutely colossal. She said she was an old woman, but she was nearly 7 feet tall. That should have been a red flag to us. But we walked her home. When we got to the house, she thanked us and offered us some cookies inside. Fresh baked, she said. We declined, and she thanked us again, and we left. The next day on the news, we saw that there was a serial killer on the loose. The news said that they were disguised as an old woman who claimed to be a disabled veteran. The report said that he lured young women into his home, claiming to be an old woman, and that he needed someone to help him walk home. Then he would offer them something inside and kill them. Jay and I were obviously beyond shock and knew that we had barely escaped a painful and probably slow death. If a strange 7-foot-tall woman asks you to come inside her house out of nowhere, you might want to say no. The next level of sleep paralysis. From OddSoul. I've been suffering from insomnia, and sleep paralysis often comes with it. It happened so much that I began to get a grip on it. I began to see the signs early, and I could usually snap myself out of it before it came on full blast. Then they started evolving. I would have dreams that started normally and changed suddenly towards a sleep paralysis experience. And then this happened. A dream that wasn't a dream. I was in a hotel room with my best friend and my sister. There was another woman with us, though I didn't recognize her. The room was quite plain. The walls were grayish-white in color and empty. There was a double bed at the middle of the room. There were no windows. I was sitting on the bed with my sister and best friend. Behind my back were the door and a walk-in linen closet. I turned to see the woman, the one I didn't know, going into the closet to get bed sheets. We were chatting and laughing out loud, having a great time. Just a normal, any-day situation, I thought. I was in a great mood, feeling relaxed, when suddenly I felt a shift. At that point, I must say I knew all the time I was dreaming, as I often do. When I felt the dream change, I didn't expect it. I felt threatened. The woman who had walked into the linen closet, her chattering stopped mid-sentence. Now I was half awake, and I could feel the sleep paralysis taking hold of me. I was back in my actual bedroom, in my own reality. I was trying my best to shake it off before something happened. Then there was this strange noise coming from my closet. I could see from the corner of my eye the woman sliding out of the closet door like a melted wax figure. She was bending in an unnatural way, and the sounds she made were sickening. It's hard to describe. It's almost like she was laughing, but in the most perturbed way. She was coming towards my actual bed. I was trying to wake myself up. I felt my body twist and turn on the bed, my hands twisting in weird angles. And when I was fully back and awake, I got up and walked around the room to make sure that I really was not in a dream anymore. It took me a long time to calm down after that. I barricaded my closet door shut, because that was terrifying. It was the first time a dream leaked into reality in such a vivid way. And I was confused. Was the woman a dream? Or was she in my room for real? These days, the thought of having sleep paralysis again terrifies me, and I pray that it doesn't happen, or at the very least, that I can shake myself out of it before it fully takes over. Well, it's getting late. You'd better go off to bed. But first, check the window. I think I saw someone standing there. Oh, there was nothing there. Wait, check the closet. I think I heard a voice. Oops, nothing again. My bad. Then rest your head. Fall asleep. But don't be surprised if you find yourself awake and unable to move. Good night. If you enjoyed this episode of Darkness Prevails, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. If you have a story of your own to share it with us at darkstories.org or darknessprevails.org. You can support the show by checking the links in the description. There's a link to my Patreon, to my merch store, and a link where you can start investing with Acorns, which helps me out too. Now, as usual, here are my 5 favorite early comments from the previous full episode, titled The Man with Empty Eye Sockets. 6 True Horror Stories. Sharavor says, you do stories on melon heads. By the way, your channel is the highlight of my day. Are you talking about bald people? Some of them have a rather strong punch, so I wouldn't be making fun of them. Caitlin the White Werewolf says, wow, that looks like Eyeless Jack without the mask. Then he would be Maskless Jack, right? Banana Mukbang says, I woke up from a dream in which I died. Twice. Does this mean my soul was transferred, thus waking up? Also, hello, Father Darkness. That just means you're now 2 shifts away from your original reality. Welcome to the new one. Cat and Dog 111 says, oh goody, a new thing of nightmares. But question, are you still working on the Stickman video? I tried to. I asked for stories a lot, but didn't get enough stories to make a full video on it. But maybe I'll just narrate what I got, because I definitely want to do the Stickman video too. Chico Jones says, cheese. What's your favorite? I'm partial to Swiss and sharp cheddar. And Luke Skywalker Indoor says, the guy in the thumbnail looks a bit like Voldemort. Oh please, Voldemort is way sexier than that. Well, that brings us to the end of this Darkness Prevails episode. But don't you worry, more scary stories are on the way soon, so stay tuned. Until next time, here are the credits to my amazing patrons who continue to donate. They're awesome people. Remember, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.